Hello everyone, welcome back to the True North Report. It's been some time since I've been around, but I'm ready to get back into it now. Because there's a lot that's actually ended up happening since, I don't even remember the last time that I actually put out a video discussing the news. But since then, I do know that we've had all sorts of crap happen. This would include the SNC Lavalin scandal that's gone on. We just had the carbon tax that was implemented all across the country just yesterday, since I'm filming this on the 2nd of April. The carbon tax itself kind of seemed like it was a bad joke, a April Fool's Day joke, but this is not what ended up happening. It is true. We now have to pay more money in the BS attempt to actually fix the environment, because a tax isn't going to make a difference on it. The main thing that people are pointing to is how it'll affect you at the gas pumps, but there's more that's going to be affecting you when it comes to heating your house, and all sorts of industry relies on using fossil fuels in order to make ends meet. This might be whether that's in manufacturing or even just things such as transportation costs are going to go up simply because of the carbon tax. So you can expect all around, whether that's groceries or whether that's product in the Best Buy or Walmart or any of that, is going to go up in price. In fact, in many areas, it already has. Now, I find it a little interesting that people are actually believing that this is going to solve the issue of climate change. If you remember, just back in 2018, we found out that according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the UN, they ended up saying that we had 12 years to live. In 12 years, if we don't change the way that we're doing things, the world's going to end, everyone's going to die, all the animals on Earth are going to die, and there'll be nothing left. Now, whether you believe this doomsday prophecy or not is up to you. Personally, I don't. I don't deny that there is a change in the climate, maybe even all over the world, but I don't believe these doomsday prophecies. But how is a carbon tax supposed to fix this? A carbon tax doesn't make a difference. It's really just a cash grab, which we're going to see how it is nothing more. But don't you think it's funny that on the final day of March, you could fill up your gas tank and be destroying the planet? On the 1st of April, you could fill up your gas tank and be saving the planet, all because you paid 4 cents more per liter to fill up your car. Of course, there were plenty of people that made the rush to the pumps simply because they didn't want to have to pay the next day in order to fill up their tank, and they filled it up all the way for that exact reason, because they know how high the price was going to be. Now, with everything that's going on that I've named, the carbon tax, the SNC Lavalin scandal, and even the Mark Norman case, there's a lot of news that we could be talking about. But what does Global News want to talk about? Global News put out this video 5 days ago. It says, impeachment, how to remove a sitting U.S. president from office. And what's ironic about it is this is what ended up happening even after we found out that the Mueller report was not going to label Trump or anybody else for indictment when it comes to colluding with the Russians. Now, there's no doubt that other foreign nations are always trying to spy on each other, influence each other's elections. There's no doubt about that. But this idea that Trump was actually colluding with the Russians in order to get into the White House and that he was Putin's puppet, it never held much merit to begin with. But even after this came out, even after we knew that this was not the case, and with everything that's going on here in Canada still, this is what Global News decided to focus on. In fact, Global News has been terrible when it comes to delivering us Canadian news ever since Trump got elected. Actually, even before that, when Trump even got into the presidential race. Ever since then, it seems that half of their content is spent focusing on America, and you can even see this when you look through some of their videos that you're over here. Hold on, let's wipe that out. Because we look down, and sure, they've had some focus on SNC Lavalin and other things, but they have the We the People Summit, Democratic Presidential, and then they have Kirsten Gillibrand speaks at We the People rally, Bernie Sanders speaks at We the People rally, Elizabeth Warren addresses We the People rally, Beto O'Rourke or Amy Klobuchar. It's just there's so much on here that had to deal with the U.S. politics over Canadian politics. Maybe half those videos are, and if you even go on Global News' website itself, it's a lot of the same thing. You can't really expect more than maybe 50% of the articles that are focusing on Canadian issues before they turn around and want to focus on Trump or something else that's going on in the States. I get it. America's our neighbor. America is the biggest country. It's the most important country in the world. Sorry, not the biggest country. It's the most important country in the world. So obviously what ends up happening in America will affect Canada. But this is just getting to a ridiculous extent. Now, getting a little bit back to what we're here for today. This is from CTV News, and it came out that we had the carbon tax that was put out on the 1st of April, but then leading up to that, there was a lot of conversation, a lot of news articles that ended up coming out, mostly from CBC, I would say, but the other news outlets picked it up, and it had to do with climate change in Canada. It's no coincidence that this ended up getting dropped just before the carbon tax ended up getting dropped, because they knew it was not going to be popular. Nobody wanted the carbon tax because it was clear that it was a cash grab for many people, and those delusional few that actually have some belief that it's going to do something, they're just liberal voters who will never change their point of view and just trust whatever they tell them. In fact, yesterday as I was on Twitter, there was all sorts of these people that were coming out saying how, well, I'm going to wait until the 1st to fill it up because, if we don't pay for it now, then our kids are going to pay for it in the future. This is the same bullshit that I heard when I was a kid. Nothing ended up changing. And the thing is, too, is these people think that because they pay the carbon tax that everything's going to change. No mention about I'm going to get rid of my car. No mention that they're going to go electric or anything of the sort. Just that the carbon tax is going to save everyone. And we're going to get into that video, that CBC report, in just a minute. But I kind of spent some part of my day today, around noonish. I was actually pretty much taking it to Catherine McKenna on Twitter because she was coming up with all sorts of crap. She really couldn't help herself. So, let's see, where do we begin? Let's start over here where it says, from Andrea G. It says, the arrogance of the Minister of Magic and Climate to say that people should just buy electric cars. She has no clue if anyone in Canada that doesn't live in Vancouver, Ottawa, or Toronto lives. Now, this is true that this is exactly the way that Catherine McKenna operates. And the thing is there's plenty of reasons that Canadians don't want electric cars. In fact, this was tried in Ontario just a few years ago by the Kathleen Wynne government, the Liberals then, and it was a complete failure. That kind of policy was just an absolute failure. But there's something else on top of this as to why buying an electric car isn't as good as it seems. I added on top of that, they conveniently leave out the fact that child labor is used to create electric car batteries. And we can see this here. Electric car demanding fueling rise in child labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there's been many stories about this, about how there's using children in order to mine for the lithium for the car batteries. And the thing is, too, is we don't even have enough lithium on this planet to be actually able to make the complete transfer over to electric cars from fossil fuel cars. There's just not enough, not without destroying even more of our planet. But there's more. This one kind of blew me out of the water, the fact that Catherine McKenna actually said this, and it was an article that she retweeted from the Huffington Post. It says, a reminder that the carbon tax will put cash back in your pocket. And she quoted from it. It says, they are likely to be better off financially after the federal carbon tax is put in place. This is because 90% of the revenue collected from the backstop will be returned to consumers and households as direct rebates. And this is quoting from the Huffington Post article, but it's also what she and the rest of their government has said about the carbon tax. So which I replied with, "You are bad at math. 100% of my money lost plus 90% of my money back equals 10% of my money lost. How does that ensure I am better off? If you threw away 10% of your paycheck, would it be easier to pay off your bills or more difficult?" Honestly, I don't know how she even came out with that and thought it was a good idea. But then she goes on. She goes on to say that Jean Charest, former Quebec premier and former progressive conservative environmental minister, introduced Quebec's successful cap-and-trade system and helped Prime Minister Brian Mulroney eliminate acid rain. He knows that putting a price on pollution works. Well, I didn't actually know much about this, so I Googled it, and the first thing I came up with was this. So it really is right on the front of when you Google something, so it's not difficult to find. But it starts up by explaining how acid rain is formed. And it says between 50% and 70% of Canada's acid rain comes from the United States, while only 2 to 10% of America's pollution in this area comes from Canada. So how could putting a price on pollution for Canadians have stopped acid rain when all that was coming from the United States to begin with? The United States don't have to deal with the cap and trade, so that wouldn't stop anything. But she went on and on and on all day about how great the carbon tax is. But we'll get in touch onto something else in just a bit. Now let's take a look into the CBC report where they discuss the carbon tax. I'm sorry, not the carbon tax. They are discussing how Canada is warming at twice the global rate as according to a climate report.
By federal scientists, and it says the annual average temperature over land has increased by 1.7 degrees Celsius since 1948. Now in the north, the story is even worse. The increase even higher at 2.3 degrees. That compared to the average global temperature that's up by slightly less than 1 degree. 0.8 degrees. The report shows an increase in precipitation and flooding in many parts of the country, but also says there's a higher risk of heat waves, drought, and wildfires, and even a risk to fresh water availability. The report also makes a crucial point about the main cause of climate change. It says,
now, the first thing about that, too, is when we kind of look at it, is that it talks about how flooding has become happen a lot more, and even how forest fires have become much more frequently. Well, BC has been one of those provinces in Canada that has dealt with forest fires for a long time. Now, despite the fact that they've had this problem that they've dealt with forest fires, about 60 to 70% of the forest fires in BC are man-made. Not that it comes from climate change, but it's actually started by someone screwing around, making a fire, and it gets out of hand. I mean, this happens all the time, and this is where most of those forest fires happen, especially during the dry season. It'll branch out. In fact, in California, last year, there was that huge fire that was down in Malibu. What I find a little funny about it is they were trying to chalk this up to climate change, but they were warning about a forest fire because of how dry California was for a long time. Going back to January of 2018, but it was about September or so of 2018 when that huge fire ended up happening. So the warning signs were there, and nothing was done in order to prevent it. They didn't do anything, but then they tried to chalk it up to climate change. In fact, the satellite footage of the fire makes you believe, too, that it actually may have been man-made, started. Now, some people are saying maybe it was, used with lasers fired from space, stuff like that. I don't believe that. I think that there was someone screwing around with a fire deep in the forest, and then it got out of hand and started the whole fire. But let's continue.
While both human activities and natural variations in the climate have contributed to the observed warming in Canada, the human factor is dominant. It is likely that more than half of the observed warming in Canada is due to the influence of human activities. The report goes on to say the largest uncertainty about the magnitude of future climate change is rooted in uncertainty about human behavior. David Miller joins me here in Toronto. He is an ambassador for inclusive climate action at C40 and the former head of the World Wildlife Fund in Canada. He was also mayor of Toronto at one point. David, welcome to you.
The World Wildlife Fund, which is actually in participation with the Trudeau Foundation, just so you know. And now we have their policies getting pushed through. But what needs to be pointed out, too, is the fact that when the report from the IPCC ended up coming out, because I think the timing of that is very interesting, and I'm talking about this report that came out last summer in 2018, where they were saying that we have 12 years to get climate change under control, otherwise we're all going to die. Well, if you look at the lead-ups to that, you find out that the UN was going broke. They were losing a lot of money. They were demanding that all of the member states pay up because not all of them are meeting their fees. And on top of this, you had Donald Trump, who was pulling money out of the UN left, right, and center. So they do this, and then they issue this warning for everything, which then would be an incentive for them to say, hey, you all got to pay your fair share now because we got to do something about climate change. And there's been rumors that at least, even though we're being told that there will be a rebate back to Canadians who pay the carbon tax, although you don't really have a choice, it's a fucking tax. Despite this, a lot of people believe that the money is going to go to the UN. That's actually, in fact, what's going to happen with it, and you aren't going to see a rebate, or not nearly as much as promised. I think this is very likely. It was a good strategy by the IPCC in order to get money funneled back into the UN when they were losing so much that they were going frickin' broke. And the thing is, too, is the IPCC and the UN itself is not really in the game of climate change. The UN for a long time has been a socialist, it has been a socialist government, essentially, world government, and the whole point was to was in order to spread the wealth from rich nations over to poor nations. This is exactly the point. In fact, if you are going to try and limit fossil fuels, then you are limiting the third world's ability to actually catch up with the rest of the West and the industrialized world, because now it's making it a lot more difficult for them. They have to pay higher prices for their energy, if that's coming from electricity or wind, or these sort of things. I guess maybe I shouldn't have thrown electricity there. I actually meant to say solar. If you're talking about solar or wind, then this makes it a lot more difficult for them, because these are unsustainable methods right now, that they actually cost more money in the long run than you're actually saving. I mean, a solar panel, if you buy it, it takes, 10 years in order to pay off or something? Not making you a lot of money right off the start. So it's actually keeping the third world in a state of poverty. But if you can tax those rich worlds, the rich countries, Canada, America, the UK, France, many of these European and Western nations, and then you can distribute that money over towards the third world, well, first of all, it's not really going to solve anything in those third worlds, which we have seen time and time again, that humanitarian efforts don't really help. In fact, it kind of makes the evil people over in the third world richer, while it doesn't help the good people over there, because what ends up happening is it ends up going towards dictators and that, and you're expecting the dictators to spread that around. In a lot of ways, too, we could probably compare it to trying to give money to First Nation reserves, is the fact that there's a lot of corrupt chiefs who will live like kings while their people are living in absolute poverty, and you're just expecting the chiefs to hand that over. Well, this is the same thing that happens when you're trying to give money to the third world, but it will bankrupt those First Nation countries. It will bankrupt Canada, the UK, France, Germany, America. We already see how we're kept in a state of perpetual debt slavery, and this is the point. It is meant to keep people in a state of debt slavery because people are much more controllable, much more open to manipulation when they don't have control over their own lives, and it can actually push towards a more socialized country, simply because as people fall more and more into debt slavery, well, then something like universal basic income suddenly sounds pretty damn good now, doesn't it? At least to those people. But we can even see from the words of the IPCC itself that they don't really deal in environmental issues as much as they like to play. Where is it? You know what? I have it right here. So as you can see here, this is a statement by Dr. Otmar Endenhofer, IPCC co-chair of Working Group 3, November 13, 2010 interview. We, the UN IPCC, redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself of the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore, and it hasn't for a long time. All it has done is made the world a much more expensive place to live in. And then this is also something that I was this wasn't a reply to Catherine McKenna, but something I did reply to someone on Twitter, and I wasn't even it was someone in support against the carbon tax. But as we can see, some of the problems that we're having right now, this is from Investors Business Daily, and we're talking about when we're talking about the carbon tax and global warming, it says, there was a study published in the American Meteorological Society Journal of Climate showing that climate models exaggerate global warming from CO2 emissions as much as 45%, but this was ignored. Then there was a study in the Journal of Nature Geoscience that found that climate models were faulty and that, as one of the authors put it, quote, we haven't seen the rapid acceleration in warming after the year 2000 that we see in the models, end quote. So this is exactly what they're trying to do to you. Don't forget that if you think back to Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, then we were half the world nations, or like a third of the world nations, were supposed to be underwater, including areas such as Miami. This hasn't ended up happening. In fact, this was supposed to be due to the northern ice caps melting, but this hasn't happened. They're still there, and in fact, they've grown larger over the last decade or so, not shrunk like they were predicting. So we're seeing we're seeing the reverse effect. In fact, even in 1989, the Associated Press put out an article that was saying that if they didn't get their climate if the world didn't get its climate under control, then the world would end by the year 2000. 19 years ago, and the world was supposed to end. And when that didn't end up happening, in comes Al Gore, who's talking about all these things. And if you think for a second that Al Gore believes this shit, don't. Because not too long ago, within the last year, he bought a house at sea level. He bought a house at sea level, but if he actually believed that the world was good, like half of the areas in the world are going to end up underwater due to melting ice caps, he wouldn't buy a house at sea level, because what would be the point? It would be gone. But he did. Not to mention how unbelievably rich the man is. The man has a net worth of tens of millions of dollars. He was the ex-vice president of the United States. You don't get that sort of money from working for government unless you're extremely corrupt, which maybe he was. I don't know much about Al Gore's time when he was vice president, but he got all this money from his movie Inconvenient Truth and the lectures that he's given ever since on climate change. Meanwhile, he jets around the world on his private jets, literally contributing to the CO2 problem, the global warming problem that he likes to rail against. In fact, there was a report released, I think it was a couple years ago now, that was saying that climate skeptics have a smaller carbon footprint than climate alarmists. People like Al Gore, people like David Suzuki. These people actually have large carbon footprints, even though they sit there and they lecture the rest of Canada and the rest of the world on the dangers of climate change. Well, that's a nice little fucking con that they have wrapped up right there. Now, the way that this is a cash grab, this carbon tax that was just released. The sneaky tax on tax effect of the carbon tax. Now, this has been something that has been talked about for years. I remember going back to 2013, talking to people around my work about the carbon tax that was being proposed. And people were even saying back then, this is just a tax on a tax. This is what has been warned. This is what's happening. And let's see how it works. So we're going to skip all this because it's all theoretical about, we're not going to talk about this. Anyway, yeah, it's not important anyway to what this actually says. So as this author, who is Neil Winokur, he says, I would like to discuss a particular sneaky aspect of the carbon tax that I have not seen covered at all covered all that much in the media. I'm referring to the fact that GST, HST will apply on top of the carbon tax. Only in Canada will Canadians accept the utter madness of paying sales tax on carbon taxes. For example, let's say the price of your gas bill increases 4 cents a liter due to the carbon tax. Well, guess what? The GST, HST charge is calculated on the total bill, including the 4 cents carbon tax. Imagine if when you file your individual T1 income tax returns every year, you have to pay a tax on the income tax, meaning let's say you pay $5,000 of income tax, and then the government adds another tax called the income tax and charges an additional 10% tax on the actual income itself. So you would pay $5,000 of income tax plus $500 of income tax. This is do you believe it's a cash grab yet? It's not doing anything. Catherine McKenna, and again, just going back to what I was just saying a minute ago about how climate alarmists have a larger carbon footprint, she's going all over the world talking about the dangers of climate change. But she's doing this by jetting around the world, sometimes on private jets. Now, planes, when it comes to a carbon footprint, are some of the most wasteful ways to travel. One of the biggest contributors to the CO2 emissions that they like to rail against. So you've got to pay for the way that they decide to live their lives. Now, in a world where you have Skype, you have the internet, she could call in all around the world. They could have this conversation very easily without leaving their living rooms. But they decide not to do that. They jet all around the world and then say, well, you can't drive your car without a tax because it's unfair and it's going to destroy the planet. Justin Trudeau just recently was vacationing in Florida and traveled back and forth between Florida and Canada like 3 times in a week, taking a plane. This is a guy who just implemented the carbon tax on you to drive your car to work. If they actually believe in this, then maybe they should give up their vehicles. Maybe they shouldn't be driving around and actually live the life that they are saying that the rest of Canadians have to live. But no, that's the ruling class for you. That's the ruling class. Do as I say, not as I do. In fact, I'm going to do the complete opposite. And if you look just down there, it's saying Enbridge looking to increase their prices. Well, this is very true. This is exactly what's happening. Here's more money you're going to be spending. Enbridge looks to increase prices by 11% due to the carbon tax. That's a huge increase, 11% that we're talking about. A huge increase. And they say that it's not going to cost Canadians that much? I mean, Enbridge is one of the biggest suppliers of, when it comes to gas across Canada. At the very least, across Ontario, without a doubt. But this is one of those companies that you use in order to heat your home, and now it's going to cost you an arm and a leg in order to heat your home, all because of Justin Trudeau wanting to virtue signal to the environmentalists, to people like David Suzuki or the World Wildlife Fund. Meanwhile, they're going to get exactly what they want. When they are in bed with Trudeau, such as this, when they're in bed with the Trudeau Foundation. This is like the Clinton Foundation, in which it's you give the money to the foundation and then you get to lobby them for the policies that you want. You get to lobby them to get the jobs that you want, get the laws pushed that you want. This is exactly the point of the Trudeau Foundation. In fact, it's even more important in Canada than it is the States, because corporations and unions are banned from giving money to politicians or political parties. Well, corporations are. In some areas around Canada, I believe unions can, but they're heavily restricted. I think it was a recent law, it may just be a provincial law here in Ontario that states that unions cannot give to a political party or candidate anymore. We are being screwed, everyone. That's all they're doing to you. All they're trying to do is screw you over, and we're eating it up. Every Canadian right now is eating it up. Do you have trouble making ends meet? Do you have trouble paying off your bills? I know I do. Well, now they're going to make it even harder for you. And we can even see the effect that this ends up having. This is from the Twitter account of Billy Pang, who is an MPP for Markham Unionville, and he's part of the Doug Ford government. Now, let's see. Here he was at a gas station, and Shell, from the looks of it. He was at a gas station when the carbon tax was going to take effect. It was almost midnight. So we're going to take a quick look at his video as we can see how the price changes at the pumps.
It's almost midnight. I'm standing outside a gas station in my riding. I would like to see what will be the impact for the federal new carbon tax in my community. Oh.
Now, bear in mind, the price before it changed was 108.9 cents per liter. Now, watch what happens in just a few seconds when it comes back up. Look at the price.
Is it going to change the price now? Whoa, what is that? Look at it.
So it went from 108.9 to 124.9. So much for 4 cents in some areas. In some places, it was just 4 cents. I've seen plenty of pictures where the gas price did increase, but it was just the 4 cents that was promised. But in this situation, wherever he happens to be, it was a huge increase. It was 108.9, and even if I was misreading that, because it's a little fuzzy, and it was 118, that is still an increase of over 4 cents per liter that you have to pay at the gas pumps. And you can thank the Trudeau government for that. Oh, that was what I was looking for earlier, but we already found it, so it's not necessary. All right. So we've seen how the carbon tax is nothing more than a cash grab. We see how the Trudeau government is just trying to make life more difficult for all Canadians. But I think this is going to backfire on them, because he's already not doing well right now in the polling due to the SNC Lavalin scandal and then the Mark Norman scandal. On top of that, a lot of people are not happy with the way that he's treated Jody Wilson-Raybould, because Jody Wilson-Raybould, you know what? I've disagreed with her on many things in the past, and I wouldn't, if she was my MP, even after all this, I would not vote for her. But she did a good job in this. But of course, I'm sure she has ulterior motives as to why she's doing what she's doing. But let's just do a sum up. So what we see right now is that back in February 7th, an article came out of the Globe and Mail that stated that Jody Wilson-Raybould was trying to be pressured by the Trudeau government and the Prime Minister's office in order to intervene in the SNC Lavalin court case, because they could do what was called a deferred prosecution agreement. When you have a company that employs a lot of people, you can, instead of them getting criminally charged for the way that they were going to, they can do this deferred prosecution agreement, and in doing so, they just pay a fine, and then they can go back to business as usual. So it's been used in the past, not in Canada, but other countries, as to prevent a company from shutting down when it has lots of employees that would lose their job. If this was just going to tank the business, then they would use the deferred prosecution agreement, pretty much a slap on the wrist. Now, Jody Wilson-Raybould didn't want to do this, and she ended up getting pressured from the Trudeau government, which seems to be more or less confirmed now. And she's been under a lot of heat for the last 2 months because of it. The Trudeau government has taken every cheap shot at her. Trudeau has said that the accusations in the Globe and Mail was false, but at the same time, his story has changed over and over. He said that they never did this. Then he said they didn't do anything illegal and they never tried to pressure her. We've seen how it's already come out that this had more to do with Trudeau getting reelected. It is more to do with him being reelected than anything else, because it's a Montreal-based company, and he is the MP for Papineau. And this would not look good. At the same time, if we look at what's ended up happening all over Canada ever since Trudeau got elected, we have Liberal governments that are getting blown out of office. The western provinces of Canada have never really been on his side, except for BC. The BC provincial government got blown out and is now being run by an NDP and Green coalition, so they're not on his side anymore. The Liberals in Ontario got obliterated from about, I believe it was 55 seats down to 7 seats, and we saw a very large Conservative majority, and the Liberals didn't even become the official opposition. And now we see Quebec is faltering. When it comes to the provincial election, the right-wing party ended up getting elected in Quebec, but even now when it comes down to the federal election, he doesn't have as much support as he did back in 2015. Quebec has always been a Liberal stronghold, and even in the Maritimes, which is another area that has a lot of Liberal governments, not a lot of seats. But that is starting to go. The GTA, which has the most ridings, the most important ridings out of all of Canada, because there's so many of them, that if you win the GTA, I've compared it to, it's like running a marathon, but getting to start halfway through. That looks like it's going to the Conservatives. So things are not looking good for Justin Trudeau right now. So he was looking for any reason to make sure that this company... he was looking for any reason, to get this company off and make sure that the scandal wasn't going to be made too public. He failed at that, though. I almost said unfortunately. But then it also turns out that there have been CEOs of SNC Lavalin in the past that have made contributions to the Liberal government. They also made contributions to Conservatives, but there's a huge disparity in the amount of money that was given to the Liberals over the Conservatives. And even something that we've... where is it? Oh, yeah. And we can see how Trudeau is trying to do a favor for some buddies. Because as we can see here, is that this guy here, Jacques Bouchy, he sits on the board of directors of SNC Lavalin, but he is also, I believe, a mentor when it comes to the Trudeau Foundation. He sits on the Trudeau Foundation as well. So it's a huge conflict of interest that we can see at the moment. Oops, did not mean to open that so soon. It's a huge conflict of interest already, and it's not looking any good with everything that's going on. Now, recently, Jody Wilson-Raybould released the audio of her conversation with the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, who has come under scrutiny by the Justice Committee, which is Liberal dominated, and they've done a shit job when it comes to actually trying to get to the bottom of this. Of course, they have. Liberal dominated, like I said. But she ended up recording this, and she's already spoken to the Justice Committee. She's already given her testimony, and it was pretty damaging to the Liberal side of the story. And now, when she was still getting more heat, she decided to release this conversation that she had with Michael Wernick months ago that she recorded. Of course, it's got her in even more trouble when it comes to the Liberals. They've used all sorts of terms talking about how it's dishonest. In fact, one Liberal MP even used the term it was treasonous, the fact that she recorded a call. It's worth noting that in Canada, there's a one-party consent system, meaning that you can record a phone call or a conversation as long as you are aware that it's being recorded. Certain states, I know in America, it's a two-party consent, meaning that both parties have to be aware of that they're being recorded, unless you believe that you're going to catch a crime in progress. So she actually has not done anything illegal. I don't think she's done anything immoral, because she felt she was being pressured in order to do, she was pressured to do something that could be illegal or could look very bad on the Trudeau government, which they did anyway. And before we continue, I want to point out that it was just released today, actually just minutes before I went live on this, that she has been kicked out of the caucus, of the Liberal caucus. She says, I have been informed. It was at 5:44 p.m. today. So not long before I went live. I went to record. I have been informed by the Prime Minister of Canada that I am removed from the Liberal caucus and as the confirmed Vancouver Granville candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada in the 2019 federal election. More to come. And you know what? Let's check the updates and see if she has added anything else to that. And it doesn't look like that she has. But the point is about this is that the Trudeau government has now removed Jody Wilson-Raybould because she actually had a principled stance on something and wouldn't back up the Liberals. This just proves that Trudeau runs his party with an iron fist, something that seems very clear, but now has been just confirmed more than anything else. And this is going to backfire. This is going to backfire on Justin Trudeau because a lot of Canadians are pissed about this situation. In fact, friggin' Warren Kinsella, who has been a longtime Liberal supporter and even worked with Liberal governments in the past, has talked about how he's been on flights and spoken to other Canadians, including a lot of Liberal Party voters who are not happy with what's going on. So it's not looking good for Justin Trudeau. But we're just going to quickly go through a couple select key parts of the audio. We're not going to sit here for the whole thing because it's 17 and a half minutes long. We're not going to do the whole thing. But let's take a quick look into what she ended up capturing.
I'm calling about the other unpleasant one. The deferred prosecution agreement thing and SNC and so on. I wanted to pass on where the PM's at. Our intelligence from various sources is that the company is getting to a very serious point now. The board has asked consulting firms for options for the board for their next meeting, which could be selling out to somebody else, moving, various things.
Yeah.
So, and it seems to be real and not a bluff. So there's a lot of another rising anxiety, as you can imagine, about signature firm and job loss and all that coming after the Oshawa thing and what's going on in Calgary and whatnot. So the PM wants to be able to say that he has tried everything he can, within a legitimate toolbox to try to head that off. So he's quite determined, quite firm, that he wants to know why the DPA route, which Parliament provided for, isn't being used. And I think he's going to find a way to get it done one way or another. So.
See, to me, this is very early on. We started from 21 seconds, and this is a minute 53. That alone tells you a lot about the situation. And again, when it comes to Jody Wilson-Raybould getting kicked out of the caucus, it makes a lot of sense. It's the fact that Trudeau was going to have this happen one way or another. And when Jody Wilson-Raybould was giving her testimony in front of the Justice Committee, she talked about how during one conversation with Justin Trudeau, he brought up the fact that the election is coming up and that he's the he's the MP for Papineau, which says that he was more concerned about how it's going to affect the polling than anything else. They made claims about jobs, but that is not really the big thing behind what they're talking about. It's the jobs played their part, but even when Gerald Butts and others have come out saying we're trying to save 9,000 jobs from being lost because they could go bankrupt or maybe they'll move out of the country, which is something that has been threatened by SNC Lavalin. Their CEO, Neil Bruce, ended up coming out. Neil Bruce, I believe, or Bruce Neil. He ended up coming out and he contradicted them on this and said, no, there's not going to be that many job losses, and it doesn't look like SNC Lavalin is really going to be leaving the country anytime soon. They actually operate all over the world, but it's a corrupt friggin' company, SNC Lavalin. It's so corrupt that it is listed on the World Bank. There's 250 companies that cannot bid on contracts for the World Banks, and 117 of them are Canadian. 115 of those are SNC Lavalin and its affiliated companies. So that just shows how corrupt this government is. We also found out that it was SNC Lavalin that Omar Gaddafi, who was the old dictator of Libya before he was overthrown by the US and Israel, we ended up finding out that his son came to Canada and they were buying him hookers and taking him out for nights on the town and all sorts of crap. So we just see how dirty this company really is. But then we have Trudeau, who's going to do anything that he possibly can in order to make sure that his friends got off with a DPA over an actual prosecution, despite the fact that they were doing all sorts of bribes across the Arab world and other crimes as well. But that's really one of the big ones that they're bringing up. But it also has to do with a hospital that was built in Montreal and how they were involved with pretty much inside. It would be a form of insider trading, I believe, about how they were getting inside information about bidding on contracts. So there's all sorts of things that they're being accused of. But let's move on to the next part.
This or any other case. So we were treading on dangerous ground here. So I'm going to issue my stern warning because I can't act in a manner, and the prosecution can't act in a manner that is not objective, that isn't independent. I can't act in a partisan way, and it can't be politically motivated. All of this screams of that. So I'm actually uncomfortable having this conversation, but I'm happy to talk to you.
And actually, something there is that is not the first time, and it is not the last time that she tells Michael Wernick that she's uncomfortable having that conversation, but he still pushes her to do it anyway.
I'll call Beverly McLaughlin. I can't even imagine her feeling in any way, shape, or form comfortable with interfering with the independent prosecutor.
Okay, but I mean, I think that's where people are talking past each other. I mean, I think the view that he's formed, which I think I share, I'm not the lawyer in any of these conversations, and Elder and others, is it's not interference. The statute specifically has these other provisions in it that allow you to ask questions of the DPP. That's
We also need to bring up that this DPA agreement was put in the 2018 budget. So it was it's a fairly fresh law, about a year old now, but it was being called on Parliament the SNC law because it was specifically getting put in place in order to defend SNC Lavalin and not for any other reason that they felt it was necessary, but it was specifically put in so that way SNC Lavalin could get off from their court case.
Provided for. It's not interference.
But I would have to issue a directive. I would have to gazette this. The prosecutor, the director, whom I know and understand after having several conversations with her about another directive on HIV that I issued, she is a by-the-book person. If this is gazetted, this will be, and this is not, and I hear you on the jobs and wanting to save jobs. I mean, we all want to do that. This goes far beyond saving jobs. This is about the integrity of the Prime Minister and interference. There's no way that anybody would interpret this other than interference if I was to step in. It doesn't matter how I would look in doing that. I mean, I'd be a mockery, and that's not the problem. The bigger problem is what it would look like down the road for the government. It's not about jobs, and I know the jobs are important, so I don't want anybody to misinterpret that I don't care about those jobs. This is about the integrity of the government and
So that's really all we're going to touch on today when it comes to this audio, but you can go find it a lot of places online. I mean, this YouTube channel I was watching it off was from CPAC, so if you haven't seen it yet, you can go and listen to it for yourself and hear the whole thing. All sorts of media sources are also carrying it. We also had a lot of what ends up getting said in there too, and it seems that actually backs up Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony and actually condemns and actually ends up condemning the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau's narrative on the whole SNC Lavalin scandal, and this is probably the main reason she got kicked out. There's plenty of things she's already done that would get her kicked out, but I think it was the release of this recorded call between her and Michael Wernick, because before it was just her word versus other people. It was Jody Wilson-Raybould versus Michael Wernick's word, and against Gerald Butt's word and Justin Trudeau's word. But now she provided the evidence of what she was saying that backs up what she talked about in the committee, in the Justice Committee. And it's also one of the reasons that they blocked her from returning. They're going to let other liberals return in order to defend the government, but they're blocking Jody Wilson-Raybould simply because it was damaging enough what she ended up saying during that Justice Committee that a lot of people were not happy with her. But now she has even more evidence to back it up. Evidence that, yes, you could fake it, but not very easily. And I highly doubt she has the editing skills in order to get that done. Maybe she knows someone with the editing skills, but so far, there's no reason to believe that that has been manipulated in any way. But one thing that I think this is all about, too, is I believe the Trudeau government is being even more careful about the SNC Lavalin scandal because it goes deeper than what we're already being told. I think it goes deeper than just the fact that the Trudeau government tried to intervene in a court case that involved their friends. But there is actually a connection from SNC Lavalin to the Trudeau government. And from SNC Lavalin, you can connect it back to the NXIVM sex cult case. I'm not kidding you. You can actually connect it all the way back. So here we go. So here we have is just a quick little diagram. We have the CEO, Neil Bruce of SNC Lavalin, who is married to Emma Griffin. Emma Griffin, she is part of a financial company called Claridge, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, Emma Griffin, through Claridge, ends up controlling the Stephen Bronfman fortune, his money. Stephen Bronfman is a longtime friend to Justin Trudeau and is one of the Liberal Party's largest fundraisers, if not the largest. Now, on top of that, we know that the Bronfman family can be connected back to the NXIVM sex cult, because we had Edgar Bronfman Sr., who was at least involved with it for a little bit, but then we had Sarah and Claire Bronfman, who was Edgar Bronfman Sr.'s daughters, who were involved in this and are currently on trial for that. In fact, even Claire Bronfman, she ended up getting, I think she was arrested and then let go on $100 million bail when it came to this. But it runs even deeper than that in like who she's been connected to, because just recently, over the last week, there was an article that was released by Fox, I believe it is. Yeah, it was Fox, talking about how Claire Bronfman ended up fainting in court. And in this article, they connect her back to none other than Michael Avenatti. Seagram Eris faints after judge questions her about Avenatti in NXIVM case. And I believe it was Claire Bronfman. Yeah. Seagram heiress Claire Bronfman collapsed in Brooklyn federal court on Wednesday. Can you see that? Okay, so it's sort of off. Hold on. Yeah, okay. It's kind of difficult for you to see, but it's cut off a little bit, but I'll read it for you. Seagram heiress Claire Bronfman collapsed in Brooklyn federal court on Wednesday, shortly after the judge in her racketeering conspiracy case asked if she had secretly retained embattled lawyer Michael Avenatti in bid to negotiate a deal with prosecutors. Bronfman was charged in July with connection to the activities of NXIVM, a self-proclaimed self-help organization that authorities say operated as an abusive cult where selected female slaves were forced to have sex with leader Keith Rainier and were branded with his initials. And the NXIVM sex cult, it runs really deep with a lot of powerful political people. Now, we can't necessarily trace that back to Justin Trudeau, but we do know that the president of Mexico, I know for a fact his daughter was involved with that, but even possibly maybe himself. So I'm starting to wonder that if this SNC Lavalin case had more to do with this, it had more to do with the NXIVM sex cult, because it's clear that this is a huge court case, and the sort of revelations that are coming out of this. I mean, we have the Smallville actress who ended up, was a part of it, but even even a few members of the Battlestar Galactica show, that was the reimagined series that was made in 2004, they have even been implicated in this. There's a lot of A-list celebrities that have been involved in the NXIVM court case, and people involved in politics. We already know that there are all sorts of political pedophile rings and sex cults that are operating all around the world. One of the biggest ones that you can look to these days is actually when it comes to British Parliament, whether that's the Westminster pedophile situation or many other situations. If you look into it, the British Parliament is just teeming with pedophiles and sexual predators, that it makes you wonder if maybe the Trudeau government is trying to cover up something to do with this. Maybe something to do with Trudeau himself. I don't know. Sophie Trudeau ain't exactly been seen around lately. She was supposed to appear with him in public today, and she never showed up. So it's possible, but I don't have enough evidence to actually say definitely if that's the case. But the fact that we can connect SNC Lavalin all the way back to here, and even we can connect Trudeau friends and big fundraisers all the way back to here, makes me believe that there's more going on than they're letting us believe. That there's more going on with this whole, more going on with the SNC Lavalin than meets the eye. Only time will tell, but we're also going to need independent reporters digging into this, because quite honestly, we can't rely on the mainstream media to report on it, because they'll report some of the facts, but they will not report the whole facts. Anyway, that's all I really have for you all today. It's good to be back. I'll try and put out more videos on a more regular basis when it comes to this channel. So take care, everyone. Hope to see you all soon.